"Young lady, that man here beat me at the orphanage. I remember him." The phrase slipped from the new employee's mouth before she even understood what she was doing, and the entire hall of the mansion froze, as if someone had turned off the sound of the world. The waiters stopped midway with their trays in the air. The band missed a chord. Some guests stood there with their mouths open, unable to hide their astonishment. And the madam slowly turned her face away, unable to believe that this simple woman in uniform, who had barely been there a week, was pointing her finger at her husband. The most respected businessman in the city, the man praised in the newspapers, invited to give lectures, photographed alongside smiling politicians, the benefactor who donated money to charities. He who just seconds before was speaking about the importance of protecting children at risk was now seen as a potential monster. The employee trembled but didn't lower her hand, her heart racing and her voice still echoing in her own head, bringing back the smell of cheap disinfectant, neatly aligned iron beds and nights of muffled crying. In his eyes, a fleeting glint of panic, like someone recognizing not only the face of someone from the past, but the return of a truth he swore to keep buried forever. And in that brief span of seconds, before anyone could react, it was no longer just a party in a luxurious mansion. There was a silent tribunal, a direct accusation, and an entire story about to be told, whether he wanted it or not. Before we delve into this amazing story, tell me which city and state you're watching from. Leave a comment and I'll reply with gratitude. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like this video. We want to share more stories like this. When Anna crossed the mansion gate for the first time, her uniform still smelling of cheap fabric softener and her thin resume folder under her arm, she felt a mixture of fear and hope she couldn't explain. She had accepted the job because she desperately needed money to pay her overdue rent and the medicine for the aunt who raised her. But there was something about that address, that surname, that high wall with cameras everywhere, that made her stomach churn, as if her body knew something her mind hadn't yet connected. The ad read, "We are looking for an organized and discreet employee for internal service," and she perfectly fit the discreet part. She had learned early on that people who came from orphanages couldn't draw attention to themselves, because too much attention always brought problems. The housekeeper greeted her with a quick smile, explained routines, schedules, rules, showed her the rooms, the pantry, the service area, everything in that porcelain-like shine that reflected a reality she had never touched. Anna walked carefully, almost afraid of polluting the air. That afternoon, she didn't see the homeowner. She only heard his name repeated a few times by the other employees. Dr. Augusto Vasconcelos, businessman, owner of a construction company, sponsor of social projects, a serious, strict man, but with a good heart. His wife, Donna Ligia, was the elegant woman who appeared in city magazines in long dresses and sparkling necklaces, always smiling beside her husband at the inaugurations of daycare centers and charity events. When Anna heard someone comment that they helped orphanages, she felt a shiver run down her spine and pretended it was just cold. She didn't want to remember. She had promised herself that she would never look back again, that that grey building with high walls, where she spent her childhood and adolescence waiting for an adoption that never came, would remain only as a distant shadow. It wasn't until the second day that she saw his face. She was in the main room, arranging the flowers on the coffee table, when she noticed the portraits hanging on the wall. Old photos of trips, award ceremonies, framed magazine covers. In one of them, a younger man in a dark suit holds a trophy, smiling proudly. His hair was a little fuller, his face without wrinkles, but the expression, that cold expression in his eyes, somewhere between arrogant and impatient, set off an alarm inside her. Anna brought her face closer to the frame, lingering a few seconds longer, looking at the smile that didn't reach his eyes, and her heart began to beat faster. That strange feeling of déjà vu took over her chest, as if she were standing before someone she knew, but from a place she no longer wanted to visit, not even in thought. Later that same day, Anna finally crossed paths with him in person. She was leaving the kitchen with a tray of coffee to take to the office when he appeared in the hallway, talking on the phone with someone important, his voice deep, his steps firm, as if he were sure the ground was his own. When he passed her, without looking directly at her, she saw up close the line of his jaw, the discreet scar near his right eyebrow, the way he pressed the phone against his ear, as if he were always irritated. The tray trembled in her hands. A flash of memory crossed her mind. A cold room, yellowish light, a young man entering furiously, shouting at the lined-up children, the same way of clenching his fist, the same haircut. Everyone face down now. The voice from the past echoed in Anna's head, and she felt her legs weaken. She almost spilled her coffee. He glanced at her quickly, only to complain about the delay in some paperwork he was waiting for, without recognizing her face. And that confused her even more. How could someone who had so deeply impacted a child's life look at her years later as if she were just another shadow in the hallway? That night, in the small room reserved for the staff, Anna stared at the dark ceiling, remembering details she had tried to erase. He wasn't a permanent employee of the orphanage, but he frequently appeared as a volunteer, a collaborator, a young man who supposedly helped discipline the children and made donations. But for those who lived there, he was the nightmare of the late afternoon. Hair-pulling, slaps, unfair punishments, humiliations in front of others. He took a sick pleasure in seeing the children afraid, especially those who dared to complain about anything. In the following days, Anna moved through the house as if she were walking through a minefield. She completed all the tasks, attended to everyone politely, maintained the discreet smile she had learned to use. But inside her body was in a constant state of alert. Every time she heard his footsteps in the hallway, her stomach clenched. When she saw him on television in a report about a businessman who finances the renovation of children's shelters, she felt nauseous. She was definitively certain one night when, passing through the silent living room, she saw an old newspaper article in a preserved photo frame. There, a picture of young Augusto shaking hands with the director of the orphanage where she lived. The caption said that he began his successful career early on, contributing to the discipline and future of underprivileged children. It was him. There was no longer any doubt. The man who today posed alongside authorities, defending projects to protect children, was the same one who forced Anna, at 9 years old, to kneel on corn kernels for hiding a friend in the storage room to protect her from punishment. The same one who turned off the hallway lights and locked a group of children in the bathroom for hours, just to teach them to obey. The same one who laughed when someone cried too much. And now he was her boss. She thought about leaving everything and leaving that very night, but she remembered her aunt coughing in the cramped room, the overdue rent, the note from the landlord threatening eviction. She took a deep breath and told herself that all she had to do was keep her head down and her mouth shut. She didn't need to talk to him. She didn't need to look at him. She didn't need to bring the past into the present. All she had to do was work, get paid, and leave. But some stories refused to be swept under the rug, and fate, in that mansion, was preparing the final encounter between the face she tried to forget and the truth that kept knocking at the door of her memory. The mansion was even more brightly lit than usual that night. Chandeliers lit, candles lined long tables, waiters coming and going with trays full of clear glasses, luxury cars parking at the entrance as if it were a status parade. It was Dr. Augusto's company's annual party, the event where he received politicians, business people, influencers, the local press, and everyone who mattered in that city. The theme that year was protected childhood, and Anna almost laughed, a bitter laugh that died stuck in her throat when she heard the decorator explain that everything had been designed to remind people of the importance of caring for vulnerable children. There was even a panel with photos of social projects, children smiling in retired daycare centers, hugs during visits to shelters. In one of the images, he appeared surrounded by boys and girls, crouching, his hand on the head of a small child, a wide smile. Anyone who didn't know the story would easily believe that a true hero was standing there. Anna received her shift for the evening. She would be responsible for the main hall, helping to serve tables and clear dishes. Her uniform seemed tighter than usual, perhaps because her body was too tense. Each guest who entered, each loud laugh that echoed, each comment about how Dr. Augusto is an exemplary man tightened the knot forming in her chest even more. She tried to follow the strategy she had repeated to herself, to be invisible, to be air, to be a wall, but the universe seemed determined to push her ever closer to the center of the scene. At one point, while arranging glasses on a side table, Anna heard the event's presenter ask for silence for the host's speech. The music faded, the conversation ceased, and people turned to the small improvised stage in front of the main staircase. There he was, perfectly tailored black suit, tie with a discreet sheen, hair combed back, microphone in hand, calculated smile. Donna Ligia was beside him, emotional, her eyes shining with pride. Augusto began to speak about overcoming adversity, about how he had grown up in difficult circumstances, but always guided by values, about how he believed that a society is measured by how it cares for its children. Anna felt a pang in her stomach. He spoke beautifully, constructed perfect sentences, and drew applause at strategic moments. He talked about renovations in orphanages, clothing donations, and internship programs for young people leaving the institutions. The audience sighed. Some filmed, others nodded in confirmation. What an incredible man. And then, to conclude his speech, he said something that sent the past piercing Anna's heart like a knife. I always believed that discipline is a form of love, and that sometimes you have to be tough to save a child from a worse future. I did it in the past, I do it today, and I will always do it with pride. The applause began even before he finished the sentence, but in Anna's ears, each clap sounded like the echo of the slaps, the screams, the sound of children sobbing in the dark. The hall faded, the sound became muffled, and she found herself back in the cold corridor of the orphanage, her knees burning on the corn cob, her hands resting on the rough floor, hearing his voice in the background saying that it was for their own good. Bah! The scent of expensive perfume and champagne from the mansion mingled in her memory with the smell of mold and disinfectant from the shelter. Without realizing it, Anna began to walk. She set the tray down on the table, passed between guests without noticing who she was gently nudging, felt her eyes welling up, her hands sweating. There was no plan, there was no prepared speech. There was only a heart that, after years of swallowing its own cry, finally refused to remain silent. When she stopped, she was a few steps from the stage, right next to a young guest holding a glass of wine, a local reporter known for covering social events. The young woman was speaking softly to her colleague about how Augusto was an inspiring man, and that was the final push. Anna's voice escaped before reason could stop it. "Miss..." The reporter turned her face away, surprised to be addressed by an employee. Anna felt all eyes begin to shift towards them, but it was too late to turn back. "Miss, that man here beat me at the orphanage. I remember him." The phrase pierced the room like thunder. For a second, no one understood if they had heard correctly. Augusto froze mid-appreciation of the applause, microphone in hand, breath held. Anna noticed dozens of eyes turning to her, some with indignation, others with morbid curiosity, many with disbelief. But now that the words had come out, what remained inside her seemed to push her to continue. He didn't just visit the orphanage. He went into the wards that nobody saw, yelled at us, hit the children, made them kneel when they cried, locked us in the bathroom more than once. I was 9 years old, but I remember his face, I remember his voice, I remember the scar on his eyebrow. I remember everything. The reporter, still holding her trembling glass, looked at the stage, then at Anna, and realized she had just stumbled upon a story much bigger than a social event. Augusto tried to laugh, adjust his tie, say it was a misunderstanding, that unfortunately disturbed people invent things, but his voice faltered. The gleam of confidence he always wore as armor in his eyes had cracked. Donna Ligia, standing beside him, whispered that they should get that woman out of there. Security was called. 2 men approached Anna, but before they could touch her, someone from the audience asked to hear what she had to say. Then another, then another. And at that moment, the party ceased to be a party. It became a stage for confrontation between a past that no one wanted to see and a truth that insisted on not dying. In the days that followed, the mansion that was once synonymous with glamour became the center of a storm that no one there was prepared to face. The reporter who heard Anna's words that night didn't let it go. Instead of treating the accusation as an embarrassing scene at a fancy event, she felt that there was a story there that hurt too deeply to be ignored. The next day, her story appeared on all the local news portals. Employee accuses philanthropic businessman of assaults at orphanage where he volunteered. The photo of Augusto smiling at charity events now shared space with accounts from former residents that began to emerge on social media, as if Anna's courage had broken a dam of silence. First, there was a timid comment on a post from someone saying, "I remember you, Anna, and I remember him too." Then another, recounting physical punishments, then yet another, describing the same scar on the volunteer's eyebrow. The reporter decided to go to the old orphanage, now under different management, and search through files, photos, and volunteer reports. She found records of Augusto's visits at the time, praise for his firm work in discipline, and most importantly, an old letter from an employee who had resigned, alleging abusive methods used by one of the staff members. The letter had never been acted upon. It had been forgotten at the bottom of a drawer, like so many children's cries that no one wanted to hear. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, the atmosphere was one of Cold War. Donna Ligia paced back and forth, calling lawyers, trying to control the damage, saying it was all just envy and ingratitude. Augusto, locked in his office, alternated between outbursts of anger and long silences, staring at his own image in the mirror. He was still trying to convince himself that he had done what was necessary, that the children were difficult, that without firmness, they would have been lost. But, as more accounts emerged, the narrative he had always used to justify his own past began to crumble. It wasn't just 2 or 3 isolated memories, it was a pattern of cruelty that repeated itself. Anna, for her part, had to face the price of speaking out. The day after the party, she was removed for her own safety, according to the home's administrator, but she understood the message between the lines. They wanted her to disappear from sight, to be forgotten, for the accusation to lose face. She thought about backing down, frightened by the scale everything had reached. But when she saw on her simple cell phone messages from other people at the orphanage saying, "Thank you for saying what we never could," and "I thought I was crazy for remembering these things. Now I know I wasn't alone," she felt she couldn't go back anymore. The reporter approached her, offering her space to tell her story calmly. In the small, unpretentious newsroom, Anna sat before the camera, her hands sweating, and spoke. She recounted the screams, the punishments, the fear, the nights she prayed that he wouldn't show up the next day. She showed small scars, noted approximate dates, described the hallway, the sound of the key turning in the door, the phrases he repeated. Each detail was a sharp blade cutting through the public image of benefactor. The interview aired during prime time locally, was shared, commented on, and questioned. In a short time, media outlets from outside the city began to show interest. Augusto's lawyers tried to counterattack, insinuating that Anna wanted money, fame, and revenge. But this version lost strength when other former inmates, who had no connection to her, began appearing in news reports, confirming the same scenes, the same phrases, the same pattern of abuse. One of them, now a father, cried in front of the cameras saying, "I thought being beaten was normal, that I deserved it. Only when I grew up did I realize that it had nothing to do with education." The prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation. The past seemed too distant for severe criminal punishments, but not distant enough for the moral and civil consequences to fall upon him. Contracts began to be cancelled, partnerships broken, invitations to speak disappeared. Child advocacy organizations demanded that he withdraw from boards and social projects. His name, once synonymous with pride for the city, became a source of embarrassment. In one of the last attempts to control the narrative, the lawyers suggested that he make a public statement in the city hall itself, alongside authorities, to clarify the situation. The place was packed. On one side, his defenders, people who refused to believe that Dr. Augusto donated so much money could be capable of such cruelty. On the other, former patients, activists, journalists, curious onlookers. In the midst of all this, Anna entered silently, sitting in the last seats, not wanting to draw attention, but knowing that she needed to be there to see the outcome of what had begun with a sentence. When they took the microphone, the lawyers tried to paint the past as different times, when pedagogical methods were different, attempting to transform aggression into outdated discipline. But the audience didn't buy it easily. A child welfare counselor raised her voice and said that hitting children has never been right, and that calling violence discipline was just a way to ease the conscience of those who practiced it. It was then that the prosecutor, tired of half measures, asked him directly, "Do you deny that you punished children in humiliating conditions? That you yelled at them, threatened them, pushed them, slapped them?" There was a heavy silence. Augusto opened his mouth, but for the first time in public, he couldn't string together a perfect sentence. He looked at the rows of chairs, and at a more distant point, his eyes met Anna's. And in that look was everything he had avoided feeling for years: shame, guilt, fear of being seen as he truly was. The microphone trembled between his fingers. He tried to say that he didn't remember the details, but his voice failed him. And in that hesitation, any chance of maintaining the mask crumbled. In the end, the prosecution concluded that, although many of the acts were time-barred, the history of abuse invalidated the image he projected. He lost honorary positions, was removed from boards, saw contracts fall through, friends distance themselves, and important people turn their backs on him in the street. The mansion, once full of guests, became a place of silent nights, with windows closed far too early. Donna Ligia, torn between pride and shame, had to face the fact that the husband she defended as an example was, for many children, the face of fear. Ina, still with little money and no steady job, felt something she had never experienced before: lightness. Not because everything had magically resolved itself, the scars of the past remained, but because for the first time, her story wasn't stuck inside her chest. She walked down the street without shrinking. When she saw someone in a dark suit, she could sleep without waking up sweating in the middle of the night, with the sensation of hearing footsteps in the hallway. She knew that other people had found their own voice through hers, and that was a responsibility she carried seriously, but also with quiet pride. One day, as she was leaving a small grocery store, a young woman approached her shyly and said, "I saw you on television. I didn't grow up in an orphanage, but I grew up in a house where beatings were normal. When I heard you talking, I had the courage to tell my story too." Anna smiled, moved, realizing that the phrase that had broken the silence at that party had touched not only her past, but also that of many people who had learned to swallow pain, thinking it was an obligation. And on that simple afternoon, with the sun weakly shining on the rooftops, she understood that some truths may take time to emerge, but when they are finally spoken, they have enough power to tear down masks, rewrite reputations, and above all, give a voice back to those who have always been treated as if they had none.